Chapter 19 of The Car. It started to rain as they came to the outskirts of Deadwood. They had run all day from the commune in good weather, but after dark, clouds started to form in small clumps, and by 10 o'clock there was lightning hitting trees along the road. And it started to sprinkle as they drove through the pine forest approaching Deadwood. Outside of the town proper, which Terry found to be small and busy, Wayland pointed to a small motel sign that said Piney Wood Inn, phones. There, pull in there. A motel? Yes, it's going to pour like hell and we don't want to camp. But won't it cost a lot of money? I'll pay. I didn't mean that. I have some money too. I just meant that, well, isn't part of trucking not to spend much money? Terry pulled into the motel and stopped in front of a small door next to a sign that said office. Wayland laughed. That's how it seemed. None of us had any, except for Wayne. Wayne had money? His repair check. Got it every month. Still does. Repair check. They blew him up a little, Wayland said. In Vietnam. Parts of him don't work. Terry watched Wayne pull the Harley up and reached back for a poncho, which he had already removed from his duffel bag. He looked so healthy, so tough. What parts? That, Wayland said, climbing out of the car, is something you don't ask. Oh. Cover the cab. It's going to fill. Wayland disappeared into the motel office, and Terry scrambled to get the plastic tarp over the cab just as it started to pour. He crouched beneath the tarp and peeked out to see Wayne standing at the side of Baby, holding his poncho out to cover the bike seat as he would hold it to protect a friend. Wayland came out in a minute, dangling a key. Room 26, follow me. He walked down the row of small bungalows until he came to the right one, and Terry and Wayne followed with the car and bike. 26. Wayland opened the door and went in. Terry pulled up and jumped out, covered the cab with the tarp, and pulled it into place with bungee cords, and ran for the door just as Wayne got there without his poncho on. He had used it to cover Baby. The rain roared down by this time, and they left the door open to watch it for a time. It was 11 o'clock, and Terry was exhausted and thinking of how they would sleep. There was only one bed in the room. We'll draw straws for it, Wayland said, noting Terry's interest. Losers sleep on the floor when we get back. Back? Where are we going? To show you Deadwood. It's nearly midnight. Exactly. Wayne laughed. Exactly. Like Deadwood doesn't come alive until midnight and then it never sleeps? We may go, Terry thought, but I won't be seeing anything. They made quick trips to the cat and brought their gear inside. Wayland put the guitar on the bed with the case open and then went to the phone and dialed a number. Yes, please send a cab to room 26 of the Piney Wood Inn. He hung up. A cab? It's raining. We don't want to walk. Besides, we need information. What kind of information? We have to find a game. Game? Poker? That's what Deadwood is all about, Wayne added. It's bikers in the summer and poker all the time. You gamble? Terry leaned against the door. No, Wayland shook his head. I play poker. There's a big difference. Poker is skill, not gambling. There are legal games here in poker parlors that we go to, but you're too young to get in, so we have to find a private game. Cab drivers know everything. Ah, here he is. They scooted from the bungalow door to the cab and piled in. Where to? The cabbie was thin, wiry. He had a cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth, and the inside of the cab smelled like a mixture of stale smoke and week old vomit. Terry cracked the window. Looking for a hold'em game? Wayland said. You came to the right place, the cabbie snorted. Hell, that's all we got here is poker parlors. unless you're looking for the other thing. No, a game. But it has to be a side game. They won't let the kid in a parlor. He's too young. The cabbie smiled. I know just the place. And safe. I don't want somebody jumping us when we get there. Terry grinned and turned to look at the window. God help anybody, he thought, who jumped Waylon. It's run by an old woman named Annie, the cabbie said. She's 84 and keeps a little automatic in her purse in her lap. It's very safe game. What kind of limit? No limit. Table stakes. That sounds right, Waylon nodded. Take us away. The cabbie drove exactly 3 blocks, turned right, and stopped in front of a log cabin that had seen better days. It was stuck in amongst some brush and other newer buildings, and was so small Terry didn't see how there could be anything inside but a cot or a table. The windows were covered with plywood. The cabbie opened the door for them, and they stepped into a room so brightly lit it hurt Terry's eyes, and he had to close them for a moment. There were 5 men and a woman sitting at a green table in the middle of the one-room cabin. At least half the men were smoking, but the room was clear of smoke, and Terry saw and heard the reason as they came in. Set off in a corner on a 2x4 stand was a huge air cleaner, whirring and hissing away. Facing the door was Annie. She was playing, but looked up and smiled when they came to the door. Room for 2? She said. Wayne shook his head. I'm not a player. Too damn dumb. All I do is lose. So much better. Terry had trouble not staring at Annie. She was old, like the cabbie said, with wrinkles and gray hair, but she was still pretty in some way he couldn't understand. Her hair was long and full and braided nearly down her back, and her cheekbones were high, with tipped-up green eyes that looked full of humor and something else as well, something that made Terry think of girls he knew in school, pictures he had seen, movies about love. Is it all right for the kid to watch? Waylon moved around the table next to Annie and took an empty chair. I'm trying to teach him the finer things in life. Annie nodded. They've got to learn, don't they? How about the rest of you guys? Waylon asked. I said it was all right, Annie answered. That makes it all right with everybody. Don't it, boys? The men, a mixture of young and middle-aged, one old, almost overweight, nodded and smiled up at Terry. Wayne moved to a box in the corner and sat down facing the door, lowered his head, and as near as Terry could tell, was instantly asleep. We're playing Hold'em, Annie said. Straight Texas Hold'em, high-low split. You know the game? Waylon nodded. What's the buy-in? $300 minimum, but most are buying in for $5 or better. Give me $1,000. Waylon took a wad of $100 bills out of his pocket, and Terry stared openly. He somehow had thought of Waylon as broke, or not really very rich. There were at least $60, $70, $100 bills in the wad, $6,000 or $7,000. Waylon peeled 10 of them off and handed them to Annie, who pushed several stacks of chips over to sit in front of Waylon. No limit, Annie said, even on first bet. You can't check and raise. Other than that, straight poker. Ante is $1. Ante is $1. House rakes $5 a pot. Any questions? Waylon shook his head, and Annie picked up the cards, shuffled them professionally, the cards flying together. She dealt each player 2 cards, face down, then set the deck down and took 2 chips out of the ante in the middle and put them on top of the deck. Open deck, she said. You bet. She pointed at Waylon, who was sitting to her left. Waylon looked at his cards without taking them off the table, cupping one hand and putting the other to curl the edges up slightly to see what they were. Terry couldn't see them at all, nor could any of the others at the table. Pull up a box, Annie said to Terry, smiling, and watch your daddy win. Uncle, Waylon said. I'm his uncle. His father is gone. Ah, these things happen, yes. And your bet? $50. Waylon pulled five $10 chips off his stack and put them in the pot. Some of the men called, matched it. Some threw their hands in. When it came around to the man sitting on Annie's right, a heavy-set man with a red face smoking a cigar that one of the other men had called a dog turd. The man added 10 more chips. Raise 100. Annie threw her hand in, and it came to Waylon. He stared at the pot, his eyes glazed a bit, then nodded. I'll raise your hand and 4 more. Terry swallowed. Waylon had been sitting at the table for 6 minutes, and he had over $500 in the pot, and they'd only been dealt 2 cards each. The heavier bet made all the men fold until it came back round to the red-faced man. He sat, staring at the pot, his eyes glazed as Waylon's had been. A beat, 2, a full 30 seconds. Then he threw his hand in and sighed. Take it. Terry realized he'd been holding his breath, and he took a lungful of air. Waylon racked the pot, and Annie handed him the deck. You won it all, high and low, pot, money, everything. You were buying it, the red-faced man said, his eyes on the edge of hard, bluffing. You could have called it, Waylon shrugged. 400 and you could have seen the cards. Next time. Fine. Terry had no idea of what had happened except that Waylon had bet $550 on 2 cards and won because nobody else would call his bet. This time Waylon dealt the same game, and for a change the hand played out. He dealt 2 cards face down to each player. The man to his left bet $20. Everybody called. Waylon didn't raise. Then he dealt 3 cards face up in the middle of the table, and everybody looked at their whole cards again. Annie sighed and threw her hand in. Bad flop, she said. You guys play. I'm out of this one. She turned to Terry. You know how to play? He shook his head. I know a little about poker, what the cards mean, but not this. This is poker. You get 2 cards, then 3 up, then 1 more up, and 1 more up. Everybody plays their 2 cards and the 5 cards in the middle as part of their hand. It's really straight 7 card stud, except we all use those cards. And high-low, added a man across the table, tall, thin, wearing a down vest, though the temperature had to be over 90 in the room. The split. Oh, yes. The highest and lowest hand split the pot. Then makes the betting a little looser. That makes the betting a little looser. Terry nodded, but he still didn't understand it. Just snatches. He was drawn back to the pot. The first 3 cards, face up in the middle, had triggered betting, and the pile of chips grew rapidly until he guessed there was close to $2,000 in the pot. Waylon dealt another card face up. Everybody bet again, except this time, when it came back around to Waylon, he stacked all his money in. I'll raise 300 more and I'm all in. Other people called, added money until the pot was close to $4,000. They had to declare if they were going high or low. Everybody went high except Waylon and the man with the red face, who both went low. Terry looked at the cards in the middle of the table. There was an ace, a 5, a 3, a king, and a queen. The high hand was won by the thin man with the down vest. The red-faced man turned his hand up. I have 6, 4. Waylon said nothing but turned his cards over. He was holding a deuce and a 4, which gave him a lower hand than the other. You get half the pot, Annie said. She raked the whole pot and started to stack the chips in 2 even piles, one for the high winner, the other for Waylon. You should have bet the hand. The red-faced man's voice was brittle. I did, Waylon shrugged. All I had. Next time, buy more chips. Waylon said nothing, but out of the corner of his eye, Terry noticed that Wayne had come awake. There was no movement. His eyes, merely open, stayed open and didn't miss anything that went on in the room. It was like a cat watching something it was going to pounce on. I won't need to, Waylon said. I just won all these. And again, that quiet sound in his voice was still menace. That had happened before at the religious commune. Wayne moved behind him, moved his shoulders. 3 seconds, Annie said. What? Waylon said to her, but kept his eyes across the table, watching as Wayne watched. 3 seconds are up. We get into these little tiffs now and then over poker. But you're only allowed 3 seconds. Burks knows that, don't you, Burke? The red-faced man looked at Annie and then back at Waylon and slowly nodded. Maybe later. Whatever, Waylon turned to Annie. Good rule. The 3-second rule. I thought so. It saves trouble. The man on Waylon's left scraped up the cards and shuffled and began to deal the next hand. Terry watched Wayne close his eyes again and apparently drop into deep sleep, and he turned back to the game. He knew some of poker. What beat what? A pair is beat by 2 pair, 2 pair by 3 of a kind. What a straight was 5 consecutively numbered cards. And a flush, 5 cards in 1 suit. But this game was more complicated. It wasn't just the best hand. It was the best and the lowest at the same time. So even if there wasn't a good high hand, they might be betting on their low hand. The betting was wild. Soon 100, 200 became the minimum bet. And Terry saw several pots that had $6,000 or $8,000 in them. Waylon didn't win them all, didn't play each hand. Often he threw his hand in with bad cards. But when he did stay in a hand, he bet heavily, always raising, and while sometimes he lost, more often he won. He played every hand with the same look on his face, staring blankly at the center of the table. His eyes seemed glazed, while he bet or waited for someone else to bet. But none of it, the playing, Waylon, the long day, the problems that morning at the religious commune, Wayne sitting like a dozing pit bull in the corner on a box. The tension in the room as Waylon won more and more. He soon had over $10,000 in chips in front of him. In a little while, none of it was enough. Terry was too tired, too pulled out by the day, and he lowered his head on his chest and fell asleep, sound asleep, gone. And that's the end of chapter 19.